I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. This is Business Edge, and let's get started straight with the business headlines. In April, Kenya's bank lending rates reached a 27-month high as wholesale deposit costs rose as the lenders and the government competed for money, setting up expensive loans for households and businesses in a reviving economy. According to data from the Central Bank of Kenya, the average loan rate jumped to 12.2% in April, the highest level since January 2020. The costly credit emerges in a period where the economy is witnessing increased demand for loans amid recovery from COVID-19 economic hardships, further putting pressure on lending rates. Tanzania's economy is forecast to grow by a slightly slower pace. Finance Minister Nchemba said that growth will slow this year before resuming up to about 2% in 2023. Tanzania's economy is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, which wreaked havoc on industries such as tourism. However, the recovery has been hampered by the conflict in Ukraine, which has driven up commodity prices such as wheat and oil. In a speech to Parliament, the finance minister predicted that the economy will expand by 4.7% in 2022 and 5.3% the following year, compared to 4.9% in 2021. The World Bank says the cost of Nigeria's fuel subsidy has exceeded the government's spending on health, education, and social protection for Nigerians. It said that removing the subsidy would help the government towards its poverty reduction scheme. The Washington-based lender, in its latest Nigeria Development Updates report titled The Continuing Urgency of Business Unusual, noted that in 2021, Nigeria's petrol subsidy cost around $4.5 billion, or roughly 2% of the GDP, far exceeding the federal government's spending on health, education, and social protection. Mauritius Commercial Bank, the Indian Ocean nation's largest bank, will open a representative office in Nigeria before the end of the year as it seeks to expand beyond oil and gas deals to cover renewables and mining. MCB, which has $850 million in exposure in Nigeria, already has representative offices in Nairobi and Johannesburg as part of its push into Africa, in addition to its offices in Dubai and Paris. Thierry Hebrod, head of corporate and institutional banking, said that the pandemic had delayed plans for the Nigeria office, but they were now in the final phase of central bank approval. This is Business Edge. We've given you the African business headlines. Now, today's show, we'll be looking at South Africa's Comair entering liquidation. We'll also be touching base with how the South African aviation industry is faring. And of course, the news that broke yesterday, Nigeria loses its multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against JP Morgan Chase. We'll have the details of that throughout the course of the show. Welcome again. This is Business Edge. At the very least, 500 million rand. That's how much more money Comair needed to stay in business. This was revealed in a liquidation application filed on Thursday by the company's business rescue practitioners. In January, the practitioners began looking for capital from investors and lenders. After the UK's COVID-19 Omicron version travel ban in December, the airline, particularly the regional British Airways business, lost about 100 million rand in booked but not flown revenue. The need for extra finance finally became more obvious. It is unclear how the 100 million rand income hole grew into a 500 million rand crater. Oil prices and the price of jet fuel have risen sharply since Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the end of February. The price of a barrel is already over $120, up from $70 in December. This and a host of other factors have led the company, established in 1946, which was listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and once regarded as one of South Africa's most profitable airline groups, to where it is now, in provisional liquidation. Let's get into the conversation after this. Joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa is Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. She's the spokesperson for the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, NUMSA, which has a number of members working with the Comair group. Phakamile, welcome again to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me. Okay, I do believe you're on mute.
Good afternoon.
Okay,
and good afternoon to your viewers. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. So let's look at this in terms of setting a foundation for the conversation. And it's been a bit of struggle over the past several years for the company to stay afloat. And a fortnight ago, there was some suspension of its services for 5 days by the aviation industry regulator. But Comair has now finally gone and been placed in liquidation. How did one of the most profitable airlines in South Africa, one of the oldest on the continent, get to this point?
Well, we believe that a lot of Comair's problems are purely down to mismanagement. You have, for example, the longest running business rescue, I think, in history. According to the Companies Act in South Africa, for a company to be placed under business rescue, that process should only last 3 months. In the case of Comair, the business rescue practitioner, Richard Ferguson, overstayed his welcome to the extent where he was basically running the airline for 2 years until it was placed under liquidation. So as far as we're concerned, we are here because of poor leadership, starting with Glenn Osmond, the CEO, but also the appointment of the business rescue practitioner made things even worse. At the same time, in March, the airline's operating certificate was suspended for about 5 days. It was suspended by the Civil Aviation Authority because, unfortunately, Comair was flouting basic safety rules. And as a result of that, the CAA forced it to be grounded until it could rectify its safety issues. Our members have complained for many, many months now about how this airline is being run. And we believe very strongly that this is an airline that should not even be in liquidation. Comair controls about 40% of the South African domestic aviation space. And the fact that under the leadership of the business rescue practitioner, Richard Ferguson, and Glenn Osmond, between the two of them, none of them were able to actually secure an investor. In our view, that is a reflection on them. It's an indictment on them. We believe other CEOs could probably have done better.
Okay, so other CEOs probably could have done better. And of course, you said that the business rescue practitioners overstayed their welcome. So let's look at some of the debts that Comair has. The total debt increased from 2.2 billion rand at the end of June 2015 to 4.9 billion rand by the 31st of December 2019. And part of that also has to do with a deal that the company made in terms of purchasing Boeing 737 MAX planes. And of course, we all know what happened in terms of what happened after the crash and the worldwide grounding. When you look at some of those issues, the purchase of the planes, when you also look now currently at the situation around the price of jet fuel as well, when you look at the historic debts and even the pandemic, do you not think that these issues are beyond the business practitioners who just came into the picture 2 years ago? You've talked a bit about the mismanagement, but beyond that, there were industrial or sector-wide issues also that could have affected Comair's ability to return to the skies.
Apologies. The issue of the jet fuel is one of the reasons that they cited for their financial distress. But I think it's also important that we balance their performance against other airlines. Other airlines are operating in exactly the same space. They are also struggling with the cost of jet fuel, but they have not collapsed. They are not liquidated. They're operating. And at the end of the day, business rescue practitioners are not supposed to run companies. Business rescue practitioners are supposed to prepare the company for a turnaround. They're supposed to deliver on a turnaround strategy and leave the operations of the company after 3 months in a way so that the company can continue. The fact that you had a business rescue practitioner who was there for 2 years means that he was effectively running the company. Now, is he qualified to do so? Absolutely not. He's not an aviation specialist. And this is precisely part of the problem. At the same time, you have a Glenn Osmond whose history is quite dismal in terms of the airlines that he ran before coming to Comair. Every single one of those airlines collapsed. So you had two people who had absolutely no idea of what they were doing, who had a history, in the case of Glenn Osmond, of failing in aviation. So we should not be surprised that Comair finds itself where it is today.
So I have to follow up with this. You say there's a documented history and there are concerns about Ferguson and Olsen as well. In terms of appointing these business rescue practitioners, because we also saw this come into play with South African Airways as well. What is the involvement, which might be limited, of the unions in this, but who really gives feedback as to who the right people are to be appointed business rescue practitioners in situations such as this?
Usually what happens is that the board of a company will meet and take a decision about appointing a business rescue practitioner. In the case of Comair, that's exactly what happened. Our understanding is that the investors met and decided amongst themselves that a business rescue practitioner needed to be appointed. Our relationship with Comair, to be frank, was not a very good one. The management of Comair was not at all transparent. They were not engaging labor at all. Even on these issues, they were not forthright. So the financial distress of the company came as a shock, even to us as labor, because the feedback that we had been receiving from the business rescue practitioner, and he would give us regular feedback every month or so. He never gave any indication that this is where the airline was headed. It was a shock for all of us. We found out the same way that the public found out on the 31st of May that this company was actually in dire financial distress and therefore flights had to be suspended. This for us is part of the reason why we say that their management style was frankly terrible, because they completely disregarded labor. There was absolutely no engagement with us except just to tell us, by the way, this is what we're doing. We have no reason to believe them when they claim that they've reached out to investors and unfortunately the engagements with investors did not bear fruit, because there was no, in our view, we don't believe that they made sufficient efforts really to turn this airline around. Certainly because they completely excluded us and only brought us in at the 11th hour when they were making the announcement that they were grounding the airline. And a couple of days later, we are now at liquidation point.
All right, so Phakamile, I'm going to ask you to hold on, because we need to really look at what could have been done to save an airline that holds about 40% market share and also one of the most oldest airlines on the continent. And then what happens for the employees in this liquidation phase that the airline now finds itself. South Africa's Comair is in provisional liquidation, which started yesterday, and there is a timeline before that liquidation becomes permanent. What happens to the employees, and could anything have been done to save the airline? The conversation continues after this. My guest today is Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, spokesperson for NUMSA, which is the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, and it has workers involved in the Comair situation. Now, Comair is one of the oldest aviation companies, not just in South Africa, but on the entire continent. It commanded, we'll have to use past tense at this point, 40% of the market share with its franchise agreement with British Airways and Kukula, which is its own airline. There are more than 1,200 jobs at risk. COVID hit the airline hard, and it was put into business rescue about 2 years ago. So, Phakamile, let's get to this point now where we're asking ourselves, what could have been done in order to save Comair? And it was an airline that was described by one of the business rescue practitioners as quite viable. Let me even talk about Richard Ferguson. And he said that an airline that had the market share, that had the British Airways regional partnership, that had modern aircraft fleet, experienced employees, sales and distribution channels, that the company was an inherently viable business. But now it's in provisional liquidation. What do you think? What does the union think could have been done to save the company?
Well, we think that certainly we needed to have a much clearer turnaround strategy for the airline. If you recall, shortly after the business rescue process was announced, Comair went and delisted from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. They then, subsequent to that, got a loan of over 100 million, which they were unable to pay back. And at the same time, during that period, they were just unable to secure an investor. This is now according to the business rescue practitioner. We are not convinced that the business rescue practitioner did enough to secure an investor. He would not, for example, disclose to us who are some of the people he tried to reach out to, what were some of the terms and conditions in relation to the sale and the possible sale of the airline and what they were looking for. He was absolutely refusing to give us any of that information. We found out about 3 days ago how much the airline actually needed in order to be turned around, because the business rescue practitioner refused again to disclose that to us, even though as Labour, we believe we could have played a positive role in assisting to get investors. NUMSA has played this role before in the past. When SA Express was looking for an investor, and we actually found one. Unfortunately, the deal didn't go through, but that had to do with other reasons in relation to the Department of Public Enterprises. But the point we're trying to make is that these people had an opportunity to work with us, to work with important stakeholders to try and turn this airline around. They just simply refused to do so. They refused to be honest about their engagements. And this is why we just don't believe them when they claim that they made the efforts to try and secure investors, especially considering the size of this airline and its role in terms of the market share in aviation.
All right, so about 1,200 employees right now don't know what's going to be their future, and a lot of them are union workers. Is there any talk of compensation? What are the plans for the employees as the liquidation process is going on now?
Well, unfortunately, liquidation is a worst-case scenario, and this is a scenario that as a union, we've been trying to avoid at all costs, because in a liquidation, workers lose a lot. They are the last to be paid as creditors. The banks and other creditors will get paid before they do. And they will, and at the same time, whatever payouts that they can receive are limited. So, for example, they're likely to get their pensions. There will be a limited cash payout. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 12,000 Rand that they can expect to receive for outstanding, for salaries or past salaries, but not much more than that. And that is effectively why, as a trade union, we've always tried to do everything possible to try and avoid liquidation, because it really does leave workers worse off. At the same time, against the South African background of extremely high unemployment, it is very unlikely that these workers are going to be absorbed into the job market in the short to medium term. So in all likelihood, whatever small monies that they get from this process, they will have to exist on for quite a long time. And so it's a very painful scenario. Unfortunately, it is not a scenario that benefits workers at all. The best thing that we can do as a union is to make sure that our members understand exactly what liquidation is, to prepare them as best as we can, and to ensure that they get whatever kind of payout that they can get from this process. Unfortunately, there's not much else available in terms of relief.
All right, so we know that all affected parties have until July 26 to provide the courts with reasons as to why the provisional liquidation order may possibly, or rather possibly should not be made final. We've also heard employees and customers who've held bookings or were owed refunds or things like that will not actually become creditors of the company. But as you've mentioned, unfortunately, they're going to be lower on the totem pole than a number of others. Is NUMSA involved at all in the process in which there will be presentations to the courts to not make this liquidation a final liquidation and completely dissolve the company? Or is this it? With the provisional liquidation being entered into, is this it for Comair and Comair employees?
What would need to happen during this period is for somebody to come in and offer to buy the airline. And if that can happen, then we can actually prevent this liquidation from going through and becoming final. as creditors, we don't have that much power to stop the process. This is not a state-owned entity. We were able to intervene on a state-owned entity because in that case, there were processes and parliamentary processes that had not been followed. And so we were able to use that to postpone that liquidation. In this case, here you're talking about Comair, which is a privately owned business. And if the parties fail to demonstrate some way of selling this airline, then unfortunately this liquidation will be made final on the 26th of July.
All right, Phakamile, thank you so much. We will be following the process. So if anything does come about that requires further introspection, we'll definitely be reaching out. Thank you so much. And as she said, it is a private business, but it happens to be one of the oldest airlines on the continent, established in 1946, holding 40% of the market share. So the question also means what happens to South African customers and customers in the Southern African region for which the airline and the company operates? What happens next for them? We're going to get into a larger picture of the South African aviation industry in just a little bit. But I know Lekan Onobanjo is standing by to give you the latest in the international business scene. I'm handing it over to Lekan now.
Welcome to International Business News. I'm Lekan Onobanjo, and we start off with the global inflation crisis. Now, the Swiss economy is expected to expand by 2.6% in 2022, the government said on Wednesday, becoming the latest region to downgrade its growth estimates due to the war in Ukraine and uncertainties in China. The deceleration from the previous forecast for 2.8% growth in March was also due to rising prices for food and energy and the need to adjust to the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. That's according to the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO. World market prices have risen sharply by 4 key Russian and Ukrainian exports, such as energy, resources, and certain food staples, including animal feeds, it has been said. Meanwhile, Germany's IFW Economic Institute said on Wednesday it was raising its forecast for German inflation this year to 7.4% from 5.8% previously. For 2023, the IFW raised its inflation forecast to 4.2% from 3.4%. IFW, one of Germany's leading institutes and part of a group that advises the government, left its forecast for GDP growth this year at 2.1%. For 2023, however, it lowered its projection to 3.3% from 3.5%. And according to IFW, the purchasing power of disposable incomes is said to be massively affected by high inflation. And in other stories now, Ireland is the third most competitive country in the Eurozone, according to new reports. The 2022 IMD World Competitiveness Rankings are based on more than 330 indicators across economic performance, government efficiency, business efficiency, and infrastructure. Ireland improved its 2021 ranking in 2 of these areas, according to the IMD. Ireland went from 22nd place to 7th place in economic performance and from 13th to 11th place in government efficiency. However, Ireland's ranking in the infrastructure area deteriorated from 20th position in 2021 to 23rd in 2022. Now, the IMD rankings assesses and ranks 63 economies around the world based on their ability to create and maintain a competitive business environment. Let's also tell you that the global technology industry is pressing the World Trade Organization to exempt data flows from cross-border tariffs, saying a failure to do so would undermine a global recovery already threatened by spiraling prices. The WTO's 164 members will present their views on the topic on Wednesday, the final scheduled day of a 4-day ministerial conference. The WTO agreed in 1998 to a moratorium on e-commerce tariffs and repeatedly extended it at ministerial conferences. Now, India, Indonesia, and South Africa were threatened to block an extension, and this raises the prospect that tariffs could be imposed on such data flows as music stream and financial transactions. South Korea's unionized truckers drove a strong bargain, with their largely peaceful strike action proving effective without antagonizing a public largely unsympathetic towards union after years of militant action. But the group of aging drivers are often seen as outliers in the country's combative and politicized industrial landscape, and their success may not be a harbinger of any wider labor market peace, experts have said. Now, while the strike cost Asia's fourth largest economy more than $1.2 billion in lost production and failed deliveries, the truckers avoided blocking roads or holding violent rallies that might have angered a public weary of demands by unionists who are better compensated than non-union peers and small business owners. And that's it on international business news. Do stay tuned. We have more for you on Business Edge. We'll be right back.